I had an experience yesterday in connection with the work that I do as a chaplain. Some of you know that I do some volunteer work with two different agencies, Knox County Sheriff's Office and Loudoun County Sheriff's Office. And I was called yesterday. Joe and I were spending the afternoon with two of our grandchildren. And later in the afternoon, I got a call from a chaplain coordinator who was out of town, and he asked me to cover a call that had come. And it was a situation where there had been a suicide. And I'll just stop and tell you this. You may not know this, and maybe you do know it, but suicide is increasingly prevalent. And it's prevalent in Loudoun County, a small county. It's prevalent in Knox County. It's just something that's very tragic. When I finally got to the scene, they had already taken this person's body away. But the situation was such that I want to share this with you. I just can't get it off my mind. I guess for one thing, it's just such a traumatic thing. But what led up to this happening has such implications for you and me. And not that I think any of you are suicidal. That's not my point in sharing this, but just to remind us of something and remind myself of something very important. There was a situation where a young man had gone to the home of this young girl's parents. She was in the home, the young girl was there, and they had broken up. She had broken off the relationship with this young man, and some other things had happened that had caused him to be quite troubled. He lost his father a couple of years ago. He was in a bad situation in his mind and spirit. So he went to this residence and had a gun, and the father went to the door and was trying to reason with this guy and calm him down. And this young man was, brandishing a weapon. So the father called 911. The police officers showed up, and two young men, when I say young, I'm talking mid-20 something, police officers, young kids is what they look like to me. But these are young men who were serving, putting their lives on the line every day. But they got there, and they tried to get this young man to calm down. Gave him verbal command, as they are trained to do, to put the weapon down. And at some point, rather than do that, he turned the gun on himself and shot himself in the head. And with that, of course, this family, and the young girl who was in the house, she never did come to the door. She didn't want to see this man. And I don't blame her. But she heard what took place. She heard all this commotion and the gunshot. But when I got there, the concern was primarily for her. She's a early 20s, maybe late teens was her age. And she began to tell me the story of her relationship with this boy. And his mindset was such that he simply couldn't see himself living without her. In the course of my conversation with her, I told her, for one thing, this is not your fault. This is not on you. This is a choice he made. Not to be cold-hearted about it, but this is not your fault, and you cannot, and this is the crux of what I want to say to you and what I said to her, you cannot make someone else happy. Not possible. Even the person who is the dearest person in your life cannot keep you, first of all, make you and maintain your happiness. In his mind, as confused and messed up as it was, in his mind, he thought that he couldn't live without her. So he obviously made a very irrational decision and had tried on other occasions to take his own life. He tried to hang himself. He tried other times to do this. But what kept coming back to me and for all of us is that is true for you and me. No one else can make you happy. No. Your circumstances cannot make you happy. Some people say, well, money doesn't buy happiness. It will rent it for a while. You can rent it for a while with money, but it won't buy it. You can't hold on to it. Circumstances won't maintain our happiness. I've said this to you many times. This is going to be very brief because we're going to take communion in just a few moments. But there is nothing that this world can offer you that you don't already have in terms of ultimate fulfillment and satisfaction that you don't already have in Jesus Christ. Amen. True enough, you're going to have some days that are difficult. All of us do. We all know that. There are those days when you don't sense the presence of God. You are downcast, maybe even at the point of despair on occasion. The Apostle Paul talked about that for himself. He himself despaired even of life at times. So I'm not saying we don't ever get to that place. We do. But the answer for us is simply not found in other people. True, people are a blessing. They can be. Your spouse, if you have a spouse, can be a real blessing, obviously. I've been encouraged many times over the years by my wife. But God has used her many times. I remember some time back, and I've shared this with most of you already, but there was a time in my life I was going through a very difficult place, and I questioned the Lord. Where are you in this? Yeah. Where are you? And what came back to me, I believe, was this reply from him. It was a question. Who do you think Joe is? Yeah. Thank you, Lord. You see, I didn't seem to be able to appreciate the fact that God was using my wife to minister to me in the season of my own discouragement and despair. We're waiting for God to show up. You know, the guy that fell off the cliff and was hanging by a branch, God sent a helicopter and he sent a man over the side and to rescue him. And he said, no, I'm waiting for God to rescue me. And he finally just let go of the branch and fell. And when he got to heaven, he said, Lord, why didn't you rescue me? You know the story, right? He said, well, I sent that guy over the cliff to get you, and you turned him down. I sent a helicopter, you turned that down. So, here you are. We fail to, maybe I should say, I fail to see God's hand in my life sometimes. Yeah. But this is what God says to us through his servant Nehemiah. And you know this verse quite well. It's in Nehemiah chapter 8, verse 10. This is what he said. That's what he said. In verse 10, he said, then he said to them, go your way, eat the fat, drink the sweet, and send portions to those for whom nothing is prepared. For this day is holy to our Lord. And this is the phrase, really, I want you to key in on and remember. Do not sorrow, for the joy of the Lord is your strength. And that, again, that word Lord there is in all capital letters, which means it is the covenant name of God. Why is that important? Because God is a covenant-making and covenant-keeping God. And when he says, I will never leave you nor forsake you, that is an absolute certainty. He simply will not leave you. And when you go through the fire, he will be with you. When you pass through the flood, yes, Lord, he will be with you. And that's just it. We are passing through, and we're passing through some hard things, individually and corporately. We pass through some hard things. But this is not our final resting place. I was listening to a radio preacher this morning. Some of you may have heard of Erwin Lutzer. He's the pastor of Moody Church in Chicago. He said, I don't want to be an obnoxious Christian. I really don't. But when I'm standing in front of the person, the lady at the airline desk, and she asked me this question, is Dallas your final destination? He says, no. I want to say no. Heaven is my final destination, but I'm passing through Dallas. But I mean, really, we got to keep that in mind. You may be passing through Dallas, and as they say around here, you can't go anywhere without going through Atlanta. But this is not our final destination. And even when you take a trip, say, well, I'm about to get to my destination. Well, yeah, you are in one sense, but in reality, no. Our final destination. We have a blessed hope. And it's not some intangible thing. It is rooted in the person of Jesus Christ. He is the first fruits of the resurrection. And that is our future. That is, resurrection is our future. Whether you live or die, ultimately you're going to be transformed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye. And you're going to be raised with Him, to Him, incorruptible and immortal. I'm thinking about David now, King David, who was faced with some real problems when his camp was overrun by the enemy. And he came back and everybody had been stolen, the women were gone, the property was gone, and people were talking about stoning him because of that happening. They were out to get rid of him because he had not, in their minds, fulfilled his responsibility. And the writer of the book of Samuel, of course, he said, David encouraged himself in the Lord. And you know what? That's what we have to do sometimes. Because you might encounter somebody else, maybe who perhaps lives under your roof, who is not particularly encouraged when you're not particularly encouraged. The good thing about having at least in my experience, having a spouse is most of the time when I'm not encouraged, she is. And when she's not, I am. But every now and then, you find yourself down in the trough together. And if you don't have a spouse, you're living alone, it's even easier to find yourself in that low place. But you're not there by yourself. He's present. Ever present, the psalmist said. Psalm 46. He's an ever-present help. A very present help in time of trouble. And for that matter, He's always present. Joe, I ask you to join me here, please. We're going to share the bread and the cup with you this morning, all of you.